Western Kentucky and received both his undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Kentucky. He practiced law as a partner at Frost Brown Todd, served as legal counsel and senior advisor to Senator Mitch McConnell, briefing coordinator to 2 U.S. Attorneys General at the Department of Justice, and assistant Commonwealth's attorney for Kentucky's 12th Judicial District. He also served as an FBI special agent domestically and in Anbar Province, Iraq, supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom. 3 years ago, he became United States Attorney for the Western District of Kentucky. The district encompasses 53 counties, more than 2 million people, 2 military installations, and federal courthouses in Louisville, Bowling Green, Paducah, and Owensboro. He serves on the executive board of the Appalachia High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. Last year, he cited historic racism that imposed shameful inequities and structural barriers to inherited wealth and opportunity as issues to be addressed in responding to Louisville's violent crime problem. Russell Coleman's been called the best prosecutor in America, with unparalleled reverence among law enforcement and unparalleled fear among lawbreakers. Please welcome the United States Attorney for the Western District of Kentucky, Russell Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Savaji. I appreciate those kind words. Although looking at many friendly faces and also looking at what some of the future guest speakers, the topics will be, I feel like you all have, between the gourmet chef, the great white hunter, the equine painter, you've drawn the short straw with me as a speaker today. So I apologize for that right at the threshold. What I don't apologize for is the topic and saying without any hesitation that I think we are on the eve, literally on the eve of the most significant law enforcement, public safety change, most significant law enforcement announcement of our generation. And I don't say that with any hesitation as to what I'm going to talk about as part of a group that will be announcing tomorrow. I'll tell you that before I dive in, and I want to be, I know with Rotary, normally I'd be tackled. Rotary is the most litigious about keeping me to 20 minutes. So the most important role in Rotary is your sergeant at arms. I don't want to get cut off right at the 20-minute mark, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I don't want to pass on bragging on your president, Julie. There are, with your chapter's focus on uniting leaders and building community, I can't think of anyone better equipped with her background, with not only with KET, but prior to that with Leadership Kentucky, in forwarding and moving forward that goal. So you are so well served to have a president like Julie Schmidt. I'm gratified not only to have Secretary Parkinson joining us, but we have an unheralded resource that we're blessed with here in Louisville, here in this Commonwealth, and that's your guest, Julie, Chief Hess, Amy Hess, who runs public safety, is literally our Chief of Public Safety here in Louisville. She is a career FBI special agent, a rocket scientist, a physicist, but someone I worked with initially as a special agent in charge of the FBI here, went on to be the highest ranking woman in the history of the FBI. And so I think we need to appreciate that we have a leader in metro government that left one of the highest ranking positions, who had responsibility for every criminal case globally that the FBI runs. Her willingness upon retirement, not to go to a beach, not to go to a contracting job where the pecuniary gain was great, but to dive into Louisville at this time, in this community, in this environment, and raise her hand and continue to serve. So if we were all sitting together, I would most certainly start a round of applause thanking Chief Hess for her service here in Metro government. We're honored to have her, and I'm honored to have her as a colleague and try to protect this city. The topic today is cause for optimism, and that's the old lawyer's trick is you start with your theme and you end with your theme, and there is a great cause for optimism, and it's not an oversell when I say that we're on the eve of one of the most significant announcements in public safety in my memory. A change in how we police, a change in how we tackle our homicide rate, which is historic. It's historic. We're at 137 homicides this year, approaching 500 non-fatal shootings. And to put that in context, the last time I spoke to you, I stood in front of you at Fraser History Museum. It's hard to imagine. I could see your faces in person without a mask. And we did these strange things where we would press our hands against each other. And it was known as shaking hands. We still did back then. And you gave me a warm reception back then in April of 2018. And I'll take you back to April of 2018, because I stood there and I pounded the podium and I talked about the need to address our then skyrocketing homicide rate. I talked about how we were on the major city chiefs list of most dangerous cities in the United States, and really pounded the podium, feeling very strongly that we had to do a better job to regress these numbers of our neighbors that were being slaughtered. And there's no other way to phrase it than that. 2018, April of 2018, the entire year 2018, we had 79 homicides. And that was unacceptable, 79 homicides. We're at 137, and it's not the end of the year. So we were in a very different time on many different levels in April of 2018. And I'll take you forward to the end of 2019 and a real sense of failure, which is what led to what I'm going to discuss with you and what we're announcing tomorrow. I'm announcing, standing with Mayor Fisher and a strange bedfellows, public safety and community leaders will be announcing tomorrow. It's driven by a sense of failure. I stood at a podium with flags like this behind me and the seal of the Department of Justice, and I stood with our Commonwealth's attorney and our then chief of police and our special agents in charge from federal agencies in December of last year, December of 2019. And we were pleased with our success in that the tool that I felt could be most effective at impacting these homicides, the tool that I have as a federal prosecutor and leading federal law enforcement in our district, which our district runs from Oldham County to our northeast, including Louisville, of course, down, including Bowling Green, Owensboro, to our river counties in Ballard, Carlisle, Hickman, and Fulton, 53 counties in the Western District of Kentucky. And excited that we were able to increase our gun prosecutions. And I'm not going to wear you out with numbers, but there are a few. I'm looking at many business leaders who live and die by statistics and data. The end of 2019, we had increased our gun prosecutions. Now, that is going after the trigger pullers, going after the most violent offenders, taking them off the street to attempt to bring those numbers down. We had increased those prosecutions almost 70%. And that took major bureaucratic moves and lighting some people up and changing how we did business. And we were proud of that. We were proud of that because that was a significant milestone. But we also had 90 homicides last year. So we failed. We had an increase in homicides last year. So with all of these efforts and the federal law enforcement agencies working with state law enforcement, working with LMPD, tearing down these silos that in law enforcement, in government writ large, and Secretary Parkinson can discuss his time in Frankfurt with you sometime, constantly dealing with silos and agencies that's not my job or that protect their turf. We have been tearing that down here, and I'm so proud of that. We've been focused on the threat, and we're particularly bad at being siloed in law enforcement. Oftentimes, our biggest impediment isn't funding, and it's not personnel. Oftentimes, our biggest impediment, and I'd pull out my credentials and show you, is what it says on our badge. We don't work well. The sheriff's office, working with the police department, working with federal agencies, we just don't do that well. And we're striving to do that more effectively here because the threat is so large on multiple fronts. But we still had 90 homicides. So we failed, notwithstanding all of these efforts to increase federal prosecutions, to bring the so-called hammer, to seek the most significant sentence possible, all of which I was directed to do by then Attorney General Sessions. So where were we? Well, I took a look at what other cities had done historically and what other cities had done somewhat recently. And this all started with this book. And if there's a takeaway from this in terms of you as Rotarians, if you want to learn more about what I'm going to dig into in a minute and really going to dive into in terms of our announcement, this book is called Don't Shoot. It's by an academic at John Jay University named David Kennedy. And the book's about 10 years old. But what the book describes is an effort of changing how we did business in law enforcement, a recognition that what we've done in law enforcement, with the best of intentions, we have over-enforced, over-policed in certain neighborhoods who also feel underprotected. It's a recognition that in many neighborhoods, we have a very, very small number of offenders, very small number that commit the vast majority of violent acts. About 1% commit the vast majority of violent acts. So it's a recognition that we have been using a baseball bat instead of a scalpel. And so what this effort did, beginning in Boston, was target that 1%, not broadly the entire neighborhood, but understand that it's about 1% of those that drive violent crime, and that so much of the violent crime that you're seeing in the evening news, those flashing lights, or that have driven that homicide rate at 137. Folks, we're gonna have over 150. God willing, it won't happen, but we're gonna have over 150 homicides in Louisville this year. So prepare for that. It has been slaughter in many neighborhoods, but it's a recognition, and this started in Boston, that this is group driven and it's a small number of people. And so the statistics, I went to law school to avoid math, but I can't avoid some of these numbers. The ability in Boston to drive down homicide rates, and especially youth homicide, because so much, and Chief Hess could attest to this, so many of the shooters and so many of the victims in Louisville, and we're seeing nationally, but we've seen in Louisville, are kids. We had a 5-year-old little boy that was killed last weekend. And the name Trinity Randolph should be one that chills you, because Trinity Randolph was a little girl a few weeks ago that was playing in her frozen playhouse and was shot and killed. And I went to Trinity Randolph's funeral, and what's striking is she had a beautiful coffin that Chris Tuack's organization covered that was, those of you who have kids and grandkids, it was a Disney Frozen coffin. And this beautiful little 3-year-old had the most beautiful little shoes on. That's who fills these numbers. We can very easily get caught up in the numbers, but that's a Trinity Randolph, or that's a DeQuante Hobbs, who was a 7-year-old little boy that was playing on his tablet 3 years ago in the Russell neighborhood that was shot sitting in his kitchen table on a Sunday night. That's who we're losing here. So it's a recognition that not only are the victims kids, but the trigger pullers are also kids. And so this approach had a dramatic impact in Boston. That it then was packaged and implemented in places as far and wide as Stockton, California, 70% decrease in homicides, not only near term, but at the 5-year mark, you see numbers that are 40, 50, 60, 70% less. Think about that. At 137 homicides, I'm not going to do the math, but if we're able to drive those down, cut those in half, or 60 or 70%, and that's not even getting to the 500 shootings we've had. We tend to focus on murders, and should, but when we say non-fatal shootings, that's a very sterile way of saying that is colostomy bags and paralysis and wheelchairs, and that is income earners removed from the home and families destroyed needing to take care of paraplegics. That's what we're talking about with non-fatal homicides. That's what those numbers themselves, that number, that 500, would be so much higher but for the magicians at the University of Louisville Emergency Department. And I'm not a Rotarian, and I'm in no position to be presumptuous and suggest this, but if you haven't had Dr. Richardson or Dr. Miller from the ED at University of Louisville, have them talk about what they see. And it's not gloom and doom. It is to talk about heroes. Talk about a resource we have here in Louisville that is unheralded to the degree that it should be. It's a small facility if you've ever toured it, and they are saving lives. They themselves are talking about these numbers. They're saving lives at rates that are just astounding. We are blessed to have the University of Louisville Emergency Department here. Unfortunately, President Bendapudi isn't here. I praise her Emergency Department any opportunity. So it's been done many places. It's known as Group Violence Intervention, or GBI. I wouldn't be a government official, an appointee of Fed, if I didn't leave you with an acronym. But what you're going to hear about is an acronym that you need to pay attention to with all due respect, and it means something. You'll hear it called GBI, or Group Violence Intervention. And I read the book, and it was compelling to me that I'm in this role with a duty to bring these numbers down, and we're just not getting it done. And I own that. When you step into these, I'm responsible for those numbers too. And so it is incredibly convicting to be sitting in these seats and not have the impact that we're seeking to have. So I picked up the phone and called Dr. Kennedy at John Jay in Manhattan and started a conversation, and he was very interested in what's going on in Louisville. I shared with him some of our numbers here. And we started a conversation, and some of you attended. I hosted a violent crime summit pre-COVID. Again, it feels like a million years ago, in February here in this office. And some of you all attended. Julie, I believe you were there, KET was represented. We had victims, Chris 2X facilitated this, talking about what those numbers are, talking about trying to raise a family, working the line at Ford, going to church, and losing your son or daughter in the Shawnee neighborhood. The Gwynn family talked to us about that. You saw victims, and we knocked down a lot of assumptions people have about what crime victims are and what it's like to lose somebody. But then we brought in, it was also interesting because of who was in the seats, because it was many of you all who blessedly live in neighborhoods where this isn't an issue. I mean, we're talking about a small number of neighborhoods in our city where all of the red dots are, a small number of neighborhoods that are being decimated. And so we brought in some of the victims to talk about what it's like to try to raise a family in these neighborhoods. But who sat in the seats? We had nonprofit leaders and faith-based leaders. We had leaders from the University of Louisville. We had law firm senior partners, folks whose exposure, and blessedly, whose exposure is the evening news. You're not exposed to this because it doesn't impact many neighborhoods. It happens over there. It happens to them. It happens to folks on the other side of this nice street divide that you all in Louisville, and not being from Louisville, the nice street divide is a north-south street thoroughfare. But to many in this city, it might as well be a wall that's 10 foot tall and have razor wire over the top of it, because almost all of these homicides take place in these neighborhoods. They're our Black neighbors. And when we talk about issues like Black Lives Matter, which they of course do, it has to be more than a hashtag or a sign. We have to tackle what is killing so many of our neighbors, and it is violent crime. And it is a recognition that we have over-policed in neighborhoods, and we have under-protected. These neighborhoods do not feel protected, and that can spawn a lengthy conversation about police reform, which isn't GBI. GBI is not overall police reform, but what it is a more equitable way of bringing down these numbers. What it does is working with LMPD, and this happened in the last few weeks. You team up with a group from John Jay, those folks that wrote this book who have done GBI in so many places. You analyze the homicides and you identify who are the small number of shooters. And you don't kick in their door and put handcuffs on. What you do, and to me, as a prosecutor, as someone who's carried a badge and a gun, almost feels wrong. It feels social worky, and I say that with no disrespect to our fantastic MSWs, social workers out there. You actually have a sit down with those individuals who are pulling the trigger, because there's a recognition that the same trigger pullers have also been traumatized. They need assistance, social agency assistance. So you call in these individuals and you offer them a carrot and a stick. You offer them the opportunity to stop pulling the trigger. You tell them, the United States attorney standing next to the Commonwealth attorney, standing next to the county attorney, say, we have you dead to rights on these charges. Oftentimes these individuals are on probation or parole, and I brought in our state justice cabinet, both juvenile justice and probation parole, to collaborate with us on this. The governor's office is collaborating with us on this. You bring these individuals in and you say, we have this leverage from the criminal justice, the traditional perspective, the traditional tools. But we also, if you don't pull the trigger, we have social service opportunities. We can get you out of this neighborhood if this is our retributive cycle, which oftentimes is driving this violence. Social media is driving this violence. It's not over drug money most of the time. It's over a social media slight. And so you can pull these kids out of the neighborhood for a short period of time. Sometimes it's as little as buying diapers. The Team Kennedy folks with John Jay are telling us. We offer them mental health services and addiction treatment and job training, these carrot and a stick type of offers, and it works. These numbers fall precipitously quickly in places large and small. And so what we have is an effort that has been funded here. It's been funded by Sandra Frazier and a number of other philanthropists that attended that Violent Crime Summit. And I didn't mention this, but David Kennedy, Professor Kennedy, came here to speak at our summit. And what he said convicted a lot of us. We're not doing it right here. We have over-enforced, well-intentionally over-enforced, but we've under-protected. And we have a lot of relationships to build in neighborhoods that have been victimized. And we're going to come at this in a different way. And tomorrow you're going to see, when I say a strange bedfellows group, you have a Trump administration prosecutor speaking to you that's going to stand next to the mayor of the city that will stand next to representatives of the governor's office, your Commonwealth attorney, county attorney, LMPD, and community organizations, folks that don't look like me or whose ideology is very different than mine sometimes. We're going to stand up there together and we're going to say, we haven't done this right, but we are going to do a better job of protecting these neighborhoods. And we are going to approach this in a more equitable way. And so I'm here not to ask for resources. This has been funded. My pitch, so oftentimes, to leaders like you, to Impetus, to our friends in GLI, and I applaud Sarah DeVasia Wisdom, who's joined us as well. She has been a real leader in leaning in more, truly leaning in more with our neighbors in the West End, held just a fantastic symposium, the Glide Trip. Didn't go to Aspen or didn't go to Nashville, but sat at St. Stephen's and listened to how the business community and how we can better engage, truly engage in the West End. And these were not the most comfortable of conversations. None of this is comfortable. I'll tell you, for a guy from rural Western Kentucky to spend more time talking about race and the need to approach this differently than any other issue, it has been a growing experience for me. It's been a convicting experience for me, though, when I see the victims and see how we have failed to protect these neighborhoods. Cause for optimism, we're doing this here. And the response so oftentimes you hear in Louisville is it won't work here. Louisville's different. And we all know this. We're inherently provincial. Louisville's different. And then we spell out why Louisville's different. And I'm probably going way beyond my time. I'm going to cut this short in a second. But that's what our colleagues from John Jay, and you'll hear from them tomorrow in our announcement, that's what they've heard in every city they've gone to, whether it is in neighborhoods in Cincinnati or Stockton. For 20 years, they have tried this approach. And they've failed some places, and they've learned from that. And it's been Darwinian. It's not happy talk. They have failed in some places. They have improved the approach. It's safe to say we know how to tackle violent crime. We know. It works. It's funded. It's happening here. It's coming. So what I would tell you is, please take a look at this book. It gives you the background. It adds both data and anecdote to what I'm saying. It gives you examples from many cities. It's about 10, 12 years old, and there's been quite a bit of success since then. But this is not an experiment. This is not trying something new. It's just trying it in Louisville for the first time. And so I would encourage you to read the book, but stay tuned to the message tomorrow, the announcement of, I say Strange Bedfellows, it might as well be a Star Wars bar of different collaborators, left, right, R's and D's. That stuff, when you talk to the Gwynn family, when you talk to these victims, all of that melts away. We have to do a better job. And so I'll go back to the nomenclature of my remarks. Again, I'd much rather be listening to the great white shark hunter than me, but
that's an after-hours
cause
show.
For optimism. Cause for optimism. We have, it is a dark time. It is still a heavy time in the city, but we are going to be making the most significant public safety announcement, possibly of our lifetimes, and how we approach this, because it works. So stay tuned. And I will say this, that if they're in questions, and I want to be quiet, but I'm talking about this approach whose intent is to drive down violent crime. It is not addressing root cause challenges. It's not addressing health outcomes or educational outcomes. It's not an either or. It's not zero sum. We have to tackle all of those inequities. We have to really dig in. But to do so, we have to have breathing room. You have to be able to step outside your house without losing your son or daughter to start tackling educational outcomes. And so what I'm talking about is a strategy for attacking one of what I would say is our most exigent challenge here. But there is much work that needs to be done. Your mentorship program, just building relationships one at a time, I applaud that. That is how, when people ask me, what can I do? I live in St. Matthews. I'm a business owner. How can I engage? It's through that mentorship. It's being salt and light, one young person at a time. And so I applaud that effort. So thank you for what Rotary is doing. And thank you for your patience in letting me go over a bit on my 20 minutes.
Russell, you are always welcome to go over your 20 minutes anytime. We're so grateful to have your leadership, and it just comes through your real passion for people and your dedication. You know, you really are an inspiration to us, and we're truly grateful for your service and for your staff. You all are just incredible. We've got lots of questions and comments. I want to start with one though, because you mentioned the announcement tomorrow. The question is, what time? Do you have a time set up for tomorrow's announcement?
So I don't know that the media advisory has gone out, but it'll be mid-morning. Okay. It'll be 10, 11 to 11-ish. So it'll be before noon tomorrow.
Okay. And we can, as Rotarians, we'll get that and then send it out to everyone so they'll get that information. Because I think
please do. The announcement will go out both from Mayor Fisher's office and from the U.S. Attorney's office. I don't know if state government will put that out as well, but it'll be for Metro government and for my office.
Okay, terrific. Are you okay to answer a couple questions then?
Yeah, of course. I don't want to be presumptuous and eat up your time.
Yeah, no. Everyone's really interested. Okay, this comes from Cliff Elgin, and he asks, recent national news stories have talked about the lack of people of color in the FBI and the low chance of advancement for the limited number of people of color in that organization. What's the status of diversity in your office and in the FBI office here?
So I would encourage you to bring in Special Agent Robert Brown and Amy Hess has sat in that seat. I'd like the FBI can talk about their specific efforts to diversify their workforce, both their special agent workforce and their support workforce. But I'll say this as a general principle, as someone who's been an agent and who now leads federal law enforcement here, we are only stronger when we more represent the communities we police. Ours is, at the end of the day, not that dissimilar from a business organization in that ours is a relationship game. Whether we're garnering information or we are engaging with victims, we want to build relationships, and we have to do a better job of resembling those that we police, those that we serve. I served, and it's ended now, but I served on the President's Commission on law enforcement and policing. I served on a subcommittee that dealt with recruitment, training, and retention. And that is, it's a challenge for the FBI. It's a challenge for LMPD, I'll tell you, and it's a challenge for the Kentucky State Police. But police agencies across the country, particularly those agencies that aren't in urban areas, how do you recruit men and women of color? And that was before these challenging times we've had in 2020. And so that is a perennial challenge. Some of the ideas we put forward is we have to recruit differently. How do you recruit more women? Which is, and I think, I don't want to punt entirely, but we have on our call the most senior woman in the history of the FBI. I'd like, if we want to dig into that question a little bit more, I'd like for her to speak to that, because that's someone that has succeeded in an environment which has traditionally been largely a male-dominated environment. So if Chief Hess is on, I think I would very much like to hear her take on that.
Chief Hess, can you unmute yourself and contribute to that, or are we putting you on the spot? I don't know if she's... Amy, are you with us?
I hate to put...
It looks like she's not on here any longer, Julie.
Well, I only put her on the spot because she's so thoughtful in how she responds to it, but I would encourage you having her to speak to that issue. But we're not getting it done to the degree that we need to across law enforcement. That's not just the FBI. We can do a better job, and that's not just throwaway line. Chiefs struggle with that. Having LMPD that now has 2 African-American females at both the highest level, Chief Gentry, as well as our deputy chief, is just a fantastic, and the right people, is a fantastic look for the city. That's rare. You don't see that, and that's something we need to strive for, because at the end of the day, law enforcement it's not about how well you can shoot, and it's not about how fast you can drive, but it's about relationship building, and we can only do that as effectively as we need to when we're more representative of those neighborhoods we police.
Russell, this question is about gangs, and have a lot of this activity, is it related to gangs, and have we had an acceleration in that area in the last few years?
You notice I didn't use the term gangs, but it's not because I'm adverse to it. Gang connotes a hierarchical organization. There are some legal definitions of gangs, but oftentimes we'll use the term gang and group can be used interchangeably in a context like this. Virtually all of these deaths are group related. We do have gangs in Louisville. They have names like the Victory Park Crips or the E-Block Bloods. They tend to be geographically located. There's an east or west dynamic. And by the way, east in this world is Smoketown, or just east of around the hospitals, just east of I-65. And I don't elevate those names in any of my public releases, but a lot of these murders are small groups. They're pretty malleable. It's a crew or a group that hang out on the block. And maybe something is said about a posting on Instagram or a posting by one group, a rap song, and then there's a retributive response and someone gets shot and killed over it, and it starts this retributive cycle. But I would posit without any hesitation that the vast majority of the homicides, deaths, those young people that are being shot in this city, it's driven by gangs and groups, which is why this approach is called group violence intervention. It's about leveraging criminal charges, leveraging the carrot of social service and opportunities, not against the individual, against the whole organization. Those call-ins I talk about, and I saw one of your questions was, can you talk a little more about Gbi Strategy? Not at length, but I would encourage you take a look at this book. But what it is you leverage, you go after that whole group and say, if there is one shot, if there is one trigger pulled, we go after the whole organization. And so what we do is utilize the group dynamic to our benefit as a disincentive, as leverage to keep triggers from being pulled. So we're going after groups. This isn't about lining up a whole bunch of individuals. These are group call-ins. All of this success elsewhere, and the success I'm hopeful for here, is group driven. That's why it's called group violence intervention.
Mary Gwen asked this question. She said Chief White tried a version of this about 12 to 14 years ago when he first came to town. Any reflections on why that wasn't sustained or what the change would be?
I do, and that's a great question. I appreciate it. By calling this a version of it, we did a halfway effort. We did do call-ins here, which is where you identify the group, you bring them in. We had Vincent James, Chief of Community Building, played a role in this and being someone from the community that talked to these kids. It was at his church that we had some of these call-ins, and it failed. It failed because, one, we didn't work with the team from John Jay. We just attempted to mimic what had been done elsewhere. But it can't just be the stick. It has to be the carrot as well. And we didn't bring a carrot then. And by the way, the stick, when you indicate that if one person pulls a trigger, both federally and in the state court, you will bring a hammer that there will be an enforcement piece if anyone pulls the trigger. That has to be followed through on, or all credibility falls apart. So it didn't work because we only went after the enforcement piece. We didn't do the other piece. But it didn't work because even on the enforcement side, we didn't do what we said we were going to do. So it's an apples to oranges comparison. I'm hesitant to even call it group violence intervention because we really didn't do it right. It was a half-hearted effort.
Thank you for that. This is from Alice Bridges, and she asked, what's your opinion of Louisville's pivot to peace violence interruption initiative that utilizes trained people from the community to intervene when they become aware of escalating situations or to connect with the people at University Hospital who survive a shooting and connect them with resources to pivot to a new direction?
Yeah, on paper that makes a lot of sense. It has worked elsewhere. Here, my understanding, and I don't know a tremendous amount, it is a different effort. You're hiring people to do the intervention. It's different than group violence intervention. There appeared to be some quality control as to who was hired. Some of those interrupters where, of course, you're dealing with some of those that you're giving second chances, and that's to be applauded. But there was some criminal activity amongst some of the interrupters. There were at least one that was charged with some felonies. So I don't know enough about, again, on paper, it makes sense because it's a relationship. It is not just handcuffs. It is, especially Christopher 2X does this. He is at University of Louisville in the middle of the night when terrible news is told to parents and brothers and sisters, and plays this effort of trying to mitigate, of trying to calm down the warring parties. That's laudable, but I don't know enough about the quality controls. I don't know enough about who was hired, and it didn't appear that the quality controls were what they should have been with that effort here.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. This is from Jean West, and she asked, have you considered having a sit down with the heads of media television companies to suggest they tone down the violent images of protests that only occurred for a few days, and also perpetuating the fear of downtown.
Yeah, that's a lot to chew on. I've not done that. That's asking media organizations to control their content, and that's a bit as much as I want to encourage, discourage the demonization of what our downtown is. Our downtown has been a violent place of late. Our downtown has been a heavy place of late. I would ask many of you, have you been downtown lately? Have you been downtown before the Taylor announcement? So as much as I want our downtown in our city to be portrayed in an appropriate light, from a public safety perspective, it's not been a place that you would want to bring your family. You can't look out of a window and not see a board. It's been a dangerous place. So is that portrayal inaccurate? I would be very hesitant to engage with media organizations to tell them to not display what's actually happening downtown. I'm sure we could have a spirited debate on the opinions of what's driving and whether it's a dangerous place, but the numbers say it has been dangerous downtown. So I appreciate the question. I understand where it comes from, but it's just not been, that's not been an effort I've been engaged with. My effort has been to try to mitigate some of the looting and violence that we saw over the last few months. We've charged about a dozen people with looting and threatening, shooting police officers, and trying to bring down LMPD helicopters. We are still, in addition to this effort, and this has been a priority for almost a year of mine, to more equitably police, we're still prosecuting those that target law enforcement, that commit violent acts. That is still occurring.
This question is from Luke Schmidt, and he asks, what can be done to remove the assault weapons from the equation? It's shocking to see militia members on the grounds at the Kentucky State Capitol with these weapons and marching literally through our streets in Louisville.
Yeah, it's a shocking look to see that. But I'm a prosecutor. My role is not to make policy. My role is to enforce law, and in my case, it's federal law. And so what we've done is target weapons in the hands of those that the law says aren't allowed to have them, felons and those that have a conviction of domestic violence, and those that have been adjudged to have a mental health challenge. That has been our priority. That is to enforce the laws that Congress has dictated that we enforce. Mine isn't to make policy, and that's for your state representatives, that's for your Metro Council members. That would be outside my brief. As a prosecutor, I enforce the law, not dictate what the law is.
Okay, and this is from Tracy Holiday. He asked, the approach you've mentioned, it requires identification of the shooters. What percentage of shooters are actually identified?
We know a lot about who's conducting the shootings. We know a lot about the gang dynamic. 2 weeks ago, representatives of John Jay from the David Kennedy team worked with several dozen members of LMPD, from homicide, from street units, in addition to some others from Metro government and federal law enforcement. And for about 8 hours, they discussed who are the neighborhoods being victimized, who's driving so much of these homicides, and they were able to narrow things. I didn't sit in, but that's a critical portion of this, and that's identifying who we're calling in to have these conversations with. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge, intelligence out there as to who is doing many of these homicides. Now, the natural question is, why are they on the street? Why are you talking about them not as defendants, but in this sense? There's a distinction between intelligence and what we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and so there's that gap. And so it's building traditionally law enforcement from intelligence, having a sense of who's committing crimes, to proving that beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's the process of investigation.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for your courageous leadership, and we absolutely appreciate you so very much, and we're excited to learn more about your announcement tomorrow, and we'll get that out to all of our members so they'll be aware of it. So just on behalf of all of us, thank you so very much, and come back again. We'd love to have you join with us. So. Well,
thank you, Julie, and I just leave on this note, there is cause for optimism in this heavy time. There are some amazing folks in law enforcement, from Jennifer Hancock's organization, Volunteers of America, to Christopher 2X. There are a diverse group of folks, and it's not ours or it's not Dee's, who are coming together to make this change here. And it's exciting. It's not happy talk, because it'll either work or it won't, and we'll know in the coming 6 months or so. But please read the book. get a sense of what I think is the most significant change in public safety maybe in our lifetimes here and how we approach this. And so there is cause for optimism.
Okay, one more time. Hold the book all the way up so we can see the whole cover.
So it's, put it in front of my face, more importantly.
Yeah, there we go.
Don't Shoot, and it's Don't Shoot by David Kennedy. It's available on Amazon. I've given out dozens of copies of that to our Attorney General, to Governor's staff, and others. So I would encourage you to pick it up on Amazon. Don't Shoot by David Kennedy. He will be on the announcement tomorrow. Professor Kennedy will be joining us. So please pay attention to that announcement. It is a big deal for Louisville.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Russell. Appreciate you.
Certainly.
And now we're going to invite Larry Sloan, owner of Larry Sloan Sales Company, LLC, a club director, chair of the Lifeline Committee, and recipient of the Rotarian of the Year Award, to come forward and share a few remarks regarding our commitment to polio. Please welcome Larry.
Thank you, Julie. I am happy to be here and talk about polio. This has been a great program, and so much of what we've talked about today has been in the challenges for education, in the challenges that we face in our community for violence and so forth. Polio, we're in the end game of polio, but how many times have you watched a game, a football game or a baseball game, and the last play upset the leader of the game at that time? We don't want to be in that position with polio. We want to get polio eradicated. There hasn't been a case of polio in Africa in the last year or two. There hasn't been a case of polio in the United States since the 1970s, and there hasn't been a case of polio that I should have said that was originated in the United States since the 1970s. There were cases that were brought in by visitors. It's a contagious disease caused by a virus. It's thought to be contaminated water. But if we can eradicate this virus completely, we can lick this disease once and for all. It will spread again if we give up on our efforts. And our efforts have been huge. Rotary was one of the founding members of the international organization that decided to try to eradicate polio in the undeveloped world. It had been eradicated in the developed world. And we worked hard, and Rotarians have donated $2.1 billion themselves to this. The Gates Foundation has matched and double matched and triple matched many of those donations. Billions of dollars have been spent. Hundreds of millions of children around the world have been vaccinated by volunteers, many of them Rotarians who are from all over the world. There are only two countries where the virus still exists. That's Afghanistan, and it's also in Pakistan. And so we want to keep rolling until this is completely eradicated, and it won't be considered eradicated until we go 3 years without a single case. Smallpox, there are only two other diseases, rinderpest and smallpox, that have been eradicated that are caused by viruses. The smallpox was in the 1970s, but it had killed hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. I don't know much about rinderpest, but the point is we need to finish what the work is that we've started. So I would encourage you to donate to Rotary's Polio Plus Fund. And you can do that very easily. You can go to myrotary.org, and just click on the donate button. That will take you to a page where the various Rotary International funds are. Click on the Polio Fund. Then you will be taken down to how much you want to donate. Click on whether it's $25, $50. Every dollar you donate will be double matched by the Gates Foundation. So your $1 will be worth $3 eventually. And then you go down and it will give you the option to join. Now, I wish you joined because otherwise our club does not get credit for your donation. So join, it doesn't take long to join. And then go ahead and give your credit card or debit card information and you're done. Do it this afternoon. Please donate to the Polio Fund today. We ask you, and you will help save lives and prevent crippling disease. Probably a lot in my age group have family members or know people, and we had Mitch McConnell here last week who talked about his own polio experience. So make an effort to do that today. Thank you so much, and back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Larry, so very much for that. And I also want to make a couple of quick announcements. First of all, our new member directory has been mailed, and if you have not received your copy, get in touch with the Rotary office. That we might not have your most current address. So be sure and check your mailbox that you received it, and then if you have not, let Alyssa know. Also, I want to remind everyone you would have received an email directly to your inbox about our Rotary member survey. We really want to hear from you. So please take a moment. There's not a lot of questions, but it's invaluable for us to know how to move forward with the club. Your input is important. And guest, we invite you to stay for our What is Rotary session. Just stay on the line and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank everyone for being here with this week, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Be well. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.